In the last video, we saw the white opening that helped me get my National Master title. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the black opening that helped me get there. This is an opening that's extremely strong, but also helps you learn slow positional chess that lets you outplay even the highest rated players. If you're interested, make sure to watch the rest of this video. The opening I'm about to show you that helped me get my title is an opening that goes by many names, and you might have heard of its many names, but every name that you've heard of has a little bit of a different variation next to it. And so the opening I'm going to show you is what I call the Philidor defense. A lot of people think it's the perk. A lot of people think it's other openings like the King's Indian. It's not any of those openings. It's the Philidor. And it transposes into a black line defense. So if you want to check on chess.com how to play this opening, I would search up those names. But let's get straight into the guide now. So the Philidor is an opening that you can play against e4. And technically you could also play it against d4 as well, but it's not as good. So I recommend that you only play this against e4. So after e4, you play d6. And while this looks like a perk, the difference between this opening and the perk is after knight of 6, and our opponent plays knight to c3, well, we don't play g6 here. g6 is the most common move here, it's the perk defense. But the opening we're going to be playing here is the Philidor. So we're going to play knight bd7. Now, a little bit of context behind this opening, why I decided to play this opening. If you enjoy an opening that is very positional, where it takes time to outplay your opponent, where mistakes by your opponent are what lets you come back, counterplay, beat up your opponent, then this is the opening for you guys. Because this is an opening that can help practice your positional skills so that you become uncontested. You keep all your minor pieces on the board, you keep all the rooks, queens on the board for a very long time, and you try to create minute weaknesses that just blast your opponent. And a lot of the times your opponents won't really know what hit them. So after knight to b to d7, there's a lot of variations today, but like my previous guide for the opening that got me my title as a white, we're going to be looking at the main line, knight to f3. Knight to f3 is very common, you guys have probably seen this before, and again, we're not going to play g6, but here we're going to play pawn to e5. Now, what does pawn e5 do? It breaks into the center, and here your opponent really has three main moves here. The best being bishop c4, but let's go over what I see very often under 2000 level. Under the 2000 level, I see a lot of people take, which is not good. This is very good for black already, and we're going to go through that really quickly. But the other variation here is pawn to d5, and pawn to d5 is again not another move that's not very good. Okay, so let's go through these two variations. Let's go through this capture variation first. This one I see the most often. But after you capture back, this position is just so much better for black, even though it looks like our knight's in a worse place than theirs. One rule I always tell a lot of my students is that never ever move your knight in front of the c-pawn. The reason for that is that it can get pinned very easily, and with the knight here, you can't actually move your pawn up, which causes a lot of problems in a lot of positions. And so the goal here is that I'm just going to play bishop e4, I'm going to pin the knight, and let's just say our opponent plays something like bishop c4, we play bishop e4. In these positions, after our opponent castles, you always have the opportunity to take on c3. And this is what I love to do in these positions, because now you have a target for you to attack. Now I have like the c3 pawn that I'm going to attack, this e4 pawn I'm going to attack. And these are going to be the things that are going to help me get my victory. I'm going to slam my queen to c5, I'm attacking this, I'm attacking this. It's really hard for your opponents to defend, especially if they don't know what they're doing. You slowly put up the pressure and you just win so much, so often. So I'm always happy whenever I see the exchange variation. It's not very good. Instead, d5 is a move that a lot of people are a little bit more scared of, but it's a position that's still not very good for white if he knows what he's doing. If for black, if he knows what he's doing. Because after pawn to d5, we have pawn to c6. We're merely contesting the center. And if our opponent's silly and he decides to just capture us over here, these positions are considered a lot better for black already, because we have technically three pawns in the center where our opponent has the singular pawn, which isn't very good. So I get the three pawns in the center, our opponent has the one pawn, and now in these positions we can even play moves like knight b6, and again we just want to play the pawn d5 eventually. But we can't play it right away because obviously our e5 pawn hangs like this, which is not great for us. However, we can set it up with moves like queen c7, bishop e7, castles, rook d8. We can play a lot of, slow developing move because it's not like our opponent can ever stop us from pushing the pawns up because he only has one. And these positions are very, very, very nice. Now, you might say, okay, what if my opponent doesn't capture? And that's a good point. What if the opponent doesn't capture us? Well, if the opponent doesn't capture us and just plays something normal, like bishop to e2, in these positions, I always love to capture right away. It's because his knight can't capture, because obviously you take on e4 and you're up a pawn. And that really is the goal of this opening. Like the Kali Zukertort that I showed you guys earlier, you have one main plan in this opening, and that's to break the center, blow up the e4 pawn, or blow up his queen side. And in this position, after taking here, he can only take back with the pawn, and now you have easy goals for you to go for. You can play moves like bishop e7. Let's say your opponent plays a move like bishop e3. We castle, they castle. This is a pretty nice position, because now we can even blow up the center a little bit more by playing a move like knight e8 with ideas of pawn f5, where you have a huge space advantage on not only the center, but also the king side as well, and you can bring your pieces in for many attacks. If you have any questions about this, let me know. I'm going to go over these variations in depth in more future videos, but for today, we're just going to go over a very brief overview of what could happen in these openings. Now that we've gone over the side variations, it's time for the main line. Now, bishop to c4. Okay, bishop to c4 is probably the scariest variation. And in my experience, the only people who I played against who play this variation are like FIDE masters and above. Sometimes national masters don't even play this as well. And the idea here is now pretty simple for black. Even though this is probably the scariest variation, it's a variation that it's easy to remember. The opponent moves the bishop out, you move your bishop out. He decides to castle, you decide to castle. Pretty simple stuff here. Here, your opponent has a lot of different ideas now, but this is where the Philidor, and this is where I get most of my wins against these high-rated players, come from. Because I know my plan better than my opponent. And that's something that's very important for you guys to understand too. If you guys understand what you're doing more than your opponent, it doesn't matter if your opponent is Magnus Carlsen himself. He's going to lose the game. So, in this position, the move that is very common here is people just like to develop their pieces like bishop to e3. And in these positions, what you're going to do is you're going to create what I like to call the crab. The idea here is you're going to go for a setup that kind of looks like a crab, where you have your bishop on b7, bishop on e7, you have the two pinchers out here on b5 and e5, and you have the c6 and d6 pawn over here in the center as its body. And now, let's just say our opponent plays rook e1. Rook e1 is a common move I like to see. I like to see whenever I'm playing black. But because it allows me to play b5 right away, it lets us kick the bishop away, tell the bishop to go away, tell him that he's going to be very sad. And when he moves something like this in these positions, you always have the opportunity now to play b4. And this is one of the common tips and tricks and tactics that you guys want to be on the lookout for in your own games, because when your opponent moves back like here, you can take the e4 pawn, and you're already up a pawn in this position. A lot of the plans, as I mentioned earlier, is just to blow up the e4 pawn. And this is the easiest way to do so. So after winning this e4 pawn, like that's the goal. You're up a pawn. You just need to consolidate, develop the rest of your pieces. And for the most part, you should be able to win most of the games that you guys play. There really shouldn't be anything too complex after this point. And so you might be wondering, and I know a lot of you guys have been leaving comments on my videos, so a lot of comments with a lot of questions, and I'm very happy to see those questions. I'm always happy to answer any. But I know a couple of you guys are probably thinking, okay, what if my opponent actually has a little bit, of a brain here and decides to play pawn a4? Now, this is what I like to call the Great Wall of China strategy, and I've been laughed at by other master level players whenever I play this strategy. But I always have the last laugh because I know what I'm doing compared to my opponent. And what I like to do in these positions is just play the very simple b6 move. And the idea being, I'm just going to play pawn a6. I'm going to slowly push b5. I'm going to push b4. I'm going to get the moves that I want to go for. And there's nothing you can do to stop me. You can never play a5 here because I'll just get b5. This is very good for me. And so, okay, what does your opponent do? Like, what do you do? Well, let's just say he plays rook e1. It's a common move I like to see. And rook b8 is the move that you usually play here at the higher levels. But if you're at the lower levels, you could technically play bishop b7 as well. It looks very nice. You have all your pieces aiming at e4, b5's coming in, and these positions are again very nice for you to play. Let's just go through like a sample variation that could happen. We play b5, they capture, we capture back, they play something like bishop back to f1, and then again in this position you can always play moves like b4, kick the knight away, and after the knight moves you can just win the pawn in e4. And again, these are the main goals of this position, where you slowly advance on the queen side, win the e4 pawn, and life is good. A lot of your opponents won't expect it, because they won't have seen this opening a lot, and you will have more experience than them, no matter if they're like 2000 rated, 1900, 1800. Alright, so this is just a brief overview of today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Any questions, leave it in the comments below, and then leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.